thing. Okay. So we've been making our way through Hebrews chapter 11, and to this point, the text is focused on the faith of several who served God before the people of Israel came in and received the land of Canaan. We've looked at Abel and Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the Hebrew midwives, Moses' parents, Moses, national Israel, and then Rahab. And of course, these are just a sampling of the men and women who walked by faith before the Lord. In today's lesson, we're picking up at verse 32. And at verse 32 and 33 in the text, we read this: "What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets." We're not going to talk about all that today. In fact, we're going to talk about the first two on the list, Gideon and Barak. That will be our focus today. But the writer's point is clear. There are so many more great people of faith to talk about, and there's so little time and so little space to talk about or write about them in. And but even at that, the writer just couldn't resist to start name dropping. The first several, the ones that we've already talked about, notice he said something about their faith. In each case, he told us, by faith, whoever it was did this. But now he's dropped that portion of how he writes, and he's just simply name dropping. Here's another person of faith, and another person of faith, and another person of faith. And of course, the writer knows that just the simple mention of the name is going to conjure up some thoughts in the reader. Oh yeah, I remember about what he did or what she did, and about the faith that was displayed. And so that is how the text continues on here for a little bit, is just simply here's a bunch of names to consider. And then in verse 35 and onward, when we get to there, he's not even going to drop names anymore. Then it's going to be circumstances. And then, I remember who did that. But the writer wants us to focus on all these great people of faith and actions of faith. And so today we're going to look at Gideon and Barak. So our introduction to Gideon takes place in Judges chapter 6. He is one of the judges, of course, and the Israelites and their land at that point when Gideon shows up, they have been ravaged for about 7 years by the Midianites. And of course it was happening because of their sin, because Israel had fallen into sin, and that whole spiral that we talked about when we studied the book of Judges is taking place here, where they've turned from God, and so because they turned from God, God brought an oppressor against them, and then after a while of oppression, finally they turn away from their sin, they cry out to the Lord, God sends them a judge, and the judge comes and restores them again. And then they fall back into the same cycle over and over again. And so we're at the point when we meet the judges that the people are now repenting and realizing, hey, we went the wrong way and we need to come back to God. And so they're crying out to the Lord, and he will deliver them through this man Gideon, who would be a judge. Now, at first, we might question whether Gideon was the right man for the job or not. He certainly did. He didn't think he was the right man for the job. He is at the threshing floor, and he's preparing wheat, and the angel of the Lord appears to him, and the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. That's what the angel of the Lord says to him. And he's not quite sure what to make of this. His response is one of cynicism, perhaps even pessimism. If the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. If God is with us, then why are we suffering the way that we're suffering? And if God is with us, then where are his miracles? Our forefathers told us about all the great miracles that God did for them. Where are his miracles for us? And so he just simply concludes, God is not with us. Despite the statement from the angel of the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. Well, the Lord didn't give up on Gideon. He also didn't answer his complaints, except to encourage him even further that he should go and save his people. Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Get up and go. Go and change the circumstance of your people. And his response, as Gideon hears this, his response now is skepticism. My Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house. You've got the wrong guy. Maybe someone can do this for Israel, but not me. You've got the wrong guy. His response reminds me of Moses when he's in front of the burning bush. And God is calling Moses to go and to deliver Israel out of Egypt. And over, Moses found reasons why he was not the right guy for this job. Yeah, who am I that I should go? And what if they won't believe me? And I'm no good at speaking. And then finally he just simply told the Lord, find somebody else. I don't want to go. And that's when the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. He was patient up until that point. But Gideon says, how can I save? I'm the least in my father's house. Our clan is the least of all the families of Manasseh. You've got the wrong guy. Still, the Lord did not rebuke Gideon. But again, the Lord encourages him. Verse 16 this time. Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. Do you get the Lord's message to Gideon? Gideon, I'm with you. I'm going to be with you. He emphasizes that over and over. What a great message to hear from God. I will be with you. Moses heard that message at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. Joshua heard that message when he was elevated to lead Israel in Joshua chapter 1. You and I have heard that same message from the Lord. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 20. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. I will never leave you nor forsake you. God has always given that message to his people. I'll be with you. No matter what you're facing, no matter how difficult it's going to be, I will be with you. You're not going to do this alone. Gideon's response. We've seen the cynicism, we've seen the skepticism, and this time it's apprehension. Gideon's response, he's still not sure. He says in verse 17, if now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talks to me. It seems that his cynicism and his skepticism have been challenged by God, and he's not sure if he can give up on that yet, because we've got 7 years of oppression under the Midianites to look back upon. I want to believe. Lord, help my unbelief. That's what's going on here. And so if I found favor in your sight, then show me a sign. Show me that it's really you, that I'm actually talking to the Lord. And so what Gideon does at this point is he bids the Lord to stay there. The Lord already said, I'm with you, so he's going to stay. He bid the Lord, stay there, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to make an offering. And so when he does so, he comes back and the offering is prepared. Understand, we're not talking about he went away for about 2 minutes and he came back again. He had to go and prepare the offering. He had to kill the animal. He had to prepare the meat and bring it all back. We're talking about something that took hours. He comes back, and the offering is prepared, and the Lord tells him to set it on this rock which is before the Lord. And the Lord caused fire to rise up out of the rock, which consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. It's me. The Lord is revealing to him, you are speaking to the Lord, to the angel of the Lord. And so his concerns, at least for the moment, have been satisfied. In fact, Gideon builds an altar there to the Lord, and he calls the place, the Lord is Peace. That's the name he gives to this place. The Lord is Peace. All right, so he's accepted the calling that he's going to do something in order to relieve Israel from the Midianite oppression. So what is Gideon's first order of business? The Lord speaks to him again a bit later on, and he commands him, tear down the altar of Baal and the wooden image that are on your father's property. Think about that. He and his family are supposed to be servants of God. They're supposed to serve the God of all creation, and yet right there on the property, and I don't know how close to the front door it is, but right there on the property is an altar of Baal and an image of Baal near it. And so God tells Gideon, the first thing you need to do is tear that stuff down, and he's going to rebuild an altar to the Lord. And we might wonder, well, why was the altar there in the first place? I don't think that Gideon and his family, that his father is leading his family in Baal worship. I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, later on, what we see about his father defends Gideon for doing what he does, tearing down this altar. But keep in mind that they have been under the thumb of the Midianites for the past 7 years. And fear of being oppressed will change some things that you do. When we first met Gideon, I said that he was threshing wheat. I said he was at the threshing floor. That I was mistaken. That's not where he was. He was at the wine press. You don't thresh wheat in a wine press unless you don't want to be out in the open and you want to be hidden so that the Midianites who are walking around don't steal your wheat. And so when you're under oppression, you do things a little differently than what you might otherwise do. The building of the altar to Baal is not necessarily that they want to worship Baal, but was this perhaps to appease the Midianites? And to make them think, oh, okay, well, we can leave the people in this house alone because they got an altar to Baal there. And so the Midianites don't pay as much attention to them. But regardless, get rid of that thing. Tear it down. And so he does. Gideon will tear down this altar and this image as he was commanded. But as you read the text, notice when he did it. At night. When nobody could see what he was doing. He didn't go out in the middle of the day when everybody's busy and doing their things and start hacking away at the image of Baal and start toppling over the rocks of the altar. He did it at night because he feared the reaction of the men of the city. They're not going to like this. And he was right, because in the morning, when the men of the city see that the altar is destroyed and the image is destroyed, they want to kill whoever's done this. Gideon thought that he had done it in secret, that nobody would know. It actually gets reported to the men of the city. It was Gideon who did this, and so they want to kill Gideon. And it's at this point we learn about his father, whose name is Joash. And Joash steps up and he defends his son, who stood for faith in the Lord. And in fact, he renames his son, or gives his son a nickname, if you will, Jerubbaal, which means to contend with Baal. We have been under Baal's thumb for the past 7 years, and finally Gideon has stepped up and he is going to contend with Baal. He's going to serve God and do it in an open way, despite the fact that he did this at night. Now, we don't know how many more altars of Baal there were throughout the land. I suspect that this wasn't the only one. And I imagine that a lot of the other ones ended up coming down, if not all of them. But eventually, at some point, the Midianites started to see that the tide was turning and were provoked over it. In chapter 6 and at verse 33, we're told that all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. They weren't on a camping trip. They intend to go to war. They have already oppressed the people of God for these 7 years, but now the people of God are getting this idea that they could rise up somehow. And so they're going to make war against Israel. And so Gideon gathers together an army. He's the judge. That's what he's supposed to do. He gathers together an army in verse 34 and 35, but he's still unsure that he's the right man for the job. And so Judges chapter 6 closes with the fleece test. He wants God to reveal to him that he really is the right man. Confirm it for me that I'm supposed to be doing this. And so there's actually 2 tests involved. The first one is a fleece of wool was put on the threshing floor, and in the morning, what he wanted was for the floor to be soaked from the dew, for the fleece to be soaked from the dew, but the ground to be dry. And God made it so. But that wasn't enough. And so the next morning, Gideon wants to use the test again, but this time, the fleece of wool on the threshing floor was to be dry, and all the ground around it was to be wet with the dew. You want to dot all our I's and cross all our T's and make sure that I'm the right man for the job. And so God confirms for him that he is the right man, that he is the one who is called to go and lead his people. So he went from being cynical to being skeptical. He went from being skeptical to being apprehensive. He went from being apprehensive to being unsure. And you might be wondering, well, how exactly did he get into the hall of faith then? Because isn't that where we're working from? Is Hebrews chapter 11. Here are these great people of faith. And all that we've seen from this guy so far really is cynicism, skepticism, apprehension, and doubt. Those are sort of the key components of the story of Gideon thus far. Let me suggest to you that Gideon is relatable. That he's one of those people that you and I might be able to relate a little bit more to than, say, an Abraham or a David or a Paul or those sorts. The circumstances around him challenged his faith and his confidence in God. Have you ever had things happen in life that make you wonder, is God really in control? Is this really how it's supposed to work? And so he was challenged. His faith was challenged. He's not the epitome of faith from start to end. We'd like to see that. And in some individuals, we do see that with some hiccups showing up here and there. But who among us can claim that we are the epitome of faith from start to end? He's included for a reason. What we do see with Gideon is the patience of God. And that if we are headed in the right direction, God will be patient and encourage our growth. And that's what he did with Gideon. Now we come into Judges chapter 7, and Gideon's ready. God's already confirmed two tests to make sure that I'm the right guy. And so he's ready to go to war against the Midianites. The doubts have been satisfied. He's going to lead the people of Israel, and we're going to have victory, and we're going to have freedom from the oppressors. And then God speaks to him. Verse 2, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands. Lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. What? Too many? How can you ever have too many people when you're going to war? Surely the more people, the better. The bigger the army, the better. Understand they're outnumbered already. They're outnumbered rather drastically, in fact. On the Midianite side, down at verse 12, here's the description. We are never given a number. But as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, and as the sand by the seashore in multitude. That is the army on the other side. It's sort of big. There is a lot of people over there. And not just people. There's camels and there's chariots. And they're outnumbered. On Israel's side, Gideon stood with 32,000 men. Gideon doesn't question God. God says the people are too many. If you go to war with them, they're going to think that they got the victory, not me. That's not going to help the nation's faith in God. And so you've got too many. And so Gideon goes out to his men and he says, whoever is fearful and afraid among you, let him turn and depart at once. Go home if you're afraid. Well, there were a bunch of guys who were shaking in their boots. In fact, 22,000 of them were afraid. They saw the numbers, 32,000 versus, wow, whatever that is. And so 22,000 of them turned back. We're not going to go to war. He just lost 2/3 of his army. Well, surely that's good, right? God said we had too many. Now we've got a lot less. We've got only 10,000 remaining. But do you see that Gideon is acting on faith now? The doubt is no longer there. He's no longer questioning whether he's in the right place and the right person, questioning what God is saying. He's simply dwindled his army by 2/3 because he understood the size of the army didn't matter because God is going to give them victory. Judges chapter 7 and verse 4, the Lord speaks up again. The Lord says, the people are still too many. 10,000 is too many. And so Gideon takes the men to the water, and God would test the men there. And whoever got down on their knees to drink would be sent home. Whoever took water in their hands and lapped it up from their hands, these are the ones who would make up the army to go out against the Midianites. 9,700 men got down on their knees to drink, which left Gideon with 300 men. 300 men to face an enemy who are numbered as the sand by the seashore. Let me give you an illustration just to show you how small this army has gotten compared to where they started. Let's say that your normal budget when you go grocery shopping is $100. And so you go buy your groceries for the week and you spend $100 to do that. Go to the store and go buy everything that you need, but take 93 cents with you and pay for it. That is what has happened to his army. This is 93 cents worth of an army compared to the $100 army that he had previously. There's no way that would ever happen at the grocery store. We understand that. But this is to make sure that they understand you did not get this victory on your own. God gave the victory. Now, we've been talking about Gideon and his faith. Consider the faith of these 300 men. If the Midianites had brought a complement of 32,000 into the battle, at one time they were equal. Of course, they had much more than that, but at one time they were equal. These 300 men, if there were 32,000 on the other side, would be outnumbered 107 to 1. It's much worse than that. Their odds are impossible apart from divine intervention. And of course, that's the point. God is on their side. And odds don't matter when God is on your side. So before Gideon leads the 300 men against the Midianites, the Lord has him go down into the Midianite camp and he overhears a conversation. And again, what's happening, there is an element of doubt in Gideon. That's why God has him go do this. And so he goes and he overhears a conversation between two men. One of them is telling the other about a dream that he had had. A loaf of bread tumbled into the Midianite camp and it struck a tent, and the tent just simply collapsed. That's a big, strong loaf of bread, right? It was a normal loaf of bread, but it's showing the power of God with the army. That's what Gideon. The other man interprets the dream. Here's what he says. This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the man of God. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. The enemy is afraid of Gideon and his 300 men. They know that God will deliver them into Gideon's hands. And so Gideon's faith is bolstered. He goes back to the Israelite camp, commands the men to get up, rise up, for God will deliver our enemies into our hands. And so they go out and they take their weapons with them. Do you see in the text what the weapons are? There's no swords, there's no spears. Each man has a trumpet, an empty pitcher, and a torch. Those aren't weapons. But that's what they take with them. They go out, they surround the enemy camp, and they blow their trumpets and they cry out loud in verse 20, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And what we find next is amazing. The Midianite camp goes into a frenzy. They are already terrified. They go into a frenzy. The Midianites actually begin to slay one another in this confusion. Some of them flee and the men of Israel pursue those, but for the most part, God turned the Midianites on themselves and gave victory. And so Gideon's faith was commemorated both in the book of Judges and then over here in Hebrews 11 as we have read. He's a great example of how God is patient with his people and how God works to grow the faith of his people as they endeavor to serve him. All right, let's take a few minutes and talk about Barak. We don't have as much revealed concerning Barak as we do about Gideon. Those who are not overly familiar with the period of the Judges may hear the name Barak and sort of wonder, what? I don't remember that being the name of one of the judges. He's not one of the judges. He's actually a commander for Israel's army. In particular, he served before Deborah, who was a judge and also a prophetess. So Deborah calls upon Barak to lead the men of Israel into battle. And here's his response. He says, if you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. No explanation given for a statement. Just simply, if you go, I'll go. If you don't go, then I'm not going. Some have portrayed the statement as weakness on his part. Some have even gone so far as to declare it doubt and cowardice. I disagree. Jamerson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary comments on the culture of the time and of that region, saying this, that it was common to take what was dearest to the battlefield along with them. They think it makes them fight better. The policy of Barak, then, to have the presence of the prophetess is perfectly intelligible, as it would no less stimulate the valor of the troops than sanction in the eyes of Israel the uprising against an oppressor so powerful as Jabin. It was customary for leaders of the people to go out to battle with the people. We see that when Moses and Israel went, Moses went with them. And when Joshua and Israel went, Joshua went with them, leading them into battle. We see it later on when we come to David and how he would go out to battle. And David would lead the people in battle. And so understand that Barak's saying this. It's not him saying that I'm afraid to go. He's the captain of the army. He's not afraid to go into battle. But he's acknowledging he's not the leader of the nation. When Gideon went. He didn't stay back and the rest of the men went. He was the leader. And you see that with the judges as we go through. And so Barak acknowledges that she's the leader of the nation. And therefore she will come. He's not handing her a sword and saying, go lead us on the front lines. But he acknowledges that she needs to be there. He wanted her presence, her guidance, her leadership. And he understands that will benefit him as the military leader and his men as they go into battle. An individual's faith and resolve to do what God's word says can only be strengthened when we invite other people who will urge us on in doing that by their presence. That is what he has just done. Deborah agrees to go, but she gives him a caution in Judges 4 and at verse 9. Here's what she says. There will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera, that's the commander of the army of Jabin, the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Now, unfortunately, some men, upon hearing that, would then reconsider the request. Oh, hang on, no glory for me. You stay here, and I'm going to go get me some glory. Right? That's not Barak's response. Barak is there to serve the Lord and to serve Deborah and to serve Israel. He is not interested in personal glory. And so he is absolutely fine with that. I suspect that he likely thought she meant herself when she said that the glory will go to a woman. It wasn't her. It was actually a woman by the name of Jael, who's the wife of Heber, a Kenite, who would drive a tent peg through Sisera's temple. But regardless, what we see in Barak is a humble man. His concern is for the nation's freedom. His loyalty is to Deborah, who is the judge of the nation, a prophetess. His faith is in God, who would grant them the victory. And so we go on into Judges chapter 5, and Judges chapter 5 has the song of Deborah and of Barak. And it begins this way. When leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Would he have been leading had he gone and left Deborah behind? Well, in a sense, yes. But she needed to lead as well. And he acknowledged that. And he wasn't so proud as to say, this needs to be about me and about how great I am. This needs to be about God and how great he is. And so he brings the judge and prophetess along, which is right to do. Verse 12, arise, Barak, and lead your captives away, O son of Ahinoam. Verse 15, the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. As Issachar, so was Barak sent into the valley under his command. Among the divisions of Reuben, there were great resolves of heart. Her coming helped the men who were fighting, helped them to have great resolve of heart to go to the battle. And so Barak is celebrated for his leadership and his service and his faith in God. Again, these two, Gideon and Barak, I believe they are great examples of faith. They're not generally celebrated for their faith, quite like men like Abraham and David are. Abraham, he's got this great epitaph. Abraham is the father of the faithful. David, an equally great one. He is a man after God's own heart. Sorry, Gideon and Barak don't have cool epitaphs. That's just not given to them. That's not the kind of individuals they were. But Gideon was a man who lived in difficult times and was able to overcome the uncertainty and the doubt with God's help. And though he was nothing special, and he admitted that himself, that he was nothing special, he was the right man in the right place at the right time because God was with him. That was the emphasis. God was with him. He didn't seek any accreditation or pomp. It was clear that God was to be glorified in what he did. Like Gideon, Barak is a humble man, not interested in self-exaltation, sought to bring honor to Deborah, and who was the leader of the nation, sought to lead the troops in faith in God's ability to save. And so we need to be like Gideon and Barak. Yeah, Abraham is a great figure of faith, and David is a great figure of faith. How many Abrahams and Davids are there here? I can get my hand down. Most of us are not Abrahams and Davids. But maybe we can be Gideons and Baraks. Maybe we can be humble individuals who overcome the struggles we face by faith. Maybe we can be those meek servants of God who are focused on accomplishing his will to his glory. And if we will make that who we want to be, then understand God can do great things through us. And so let's be like Gideon and like Barak. If we can help you in your walk with the Lord today, we want to do that. If we can help to build up your faith, let us know how we can build your faith. God gives us this family, this community of believers, so we can encourage and help each other in the walk of faith. Sometimes we face struggles that knock us down. And so let's help lift each other up. If we're going through difficult times, let's help one another and be